am so humbled and honored to have Mayor Martinez's support and a reminder, as she offered, that mayors get things done. That when you are a mayor and the phone call comes in, you've got to manage whatever the issue is. Maybe it's a snowstorm, although I think we all agree it's less than a foot, probably nothing to worry about. Maybe it's another kind of weather emergency. Maybe it's an economic development problem. Maybe it's the challenges created by racial inequality in a community. Whatever it is, sometimes there's no one else to call. And when you're a mayor, you just got to get the job done. And I believe our country would be well served if Washington started looking a little more like our best-run cities and towns rather than the other way around. We've got to bring some of that common sense to our nation's capital. I'm so pleased to be back in Storm Lake because it made such an impression on me the last time I was able to be here. And this is a community that I think shows the challenges but also the hope of how smaller and rural communities can look to the future. And it reminds me of the potential of areas right around me in South Bend, Indiana, and so many places that I'm visiting across Iowa and across the United States. And I think what unites us is, above all, a sense of needing to be ready for a future that is uncertain, but that can be so much brighter than the moment we're living in right now. So in the name of that future, I want to begin by asking you to visualize, as specifically as possible, what it's going to be like that first day that the sun comes up over our country and Donald Trump is no longer the President of the United States. Just let that marinate for a minute. Feels good, right? It's a happy image to think about, just putting that chaos behind us, putting that corruption behind us, not waking up worried about what the latest tweet is going to be emanating from the Oval Office. But the reason that I'm asking America to think about that day is not just to give us something to look forward to, although it's a relief to contemplate the fact that one way or the other that day will come. But it's really to think about what we're going to need on that day, what we're going to need from each other, and what we're going to need from our president. Because if you think about it, on that day, the sun's coming up over a country that will be even more divided and torn up over politics than we are right now. We will be even more polarized just from everything we've been through, and everything we're about to go through. Very much in need of being brought together and unified, exhausted from fighting. And yet, something else will be true at the same time. And that will be that major crises that helped us get to this point will still be there on the president's desk crying out for action because they didn't take a vacation during the impeachment process or the Trump presidency. We are still going to have a climate that is this close to the point of no return. We're going to have a crisis of gun violence that has kids learning active shooter drills before they learn how to read. We're going to have an economy that looks good on the stock market tickers across the bottom of a cable TV news screen, but when you're sitting at your kitchen table, can't help but notice that more and more families can barely get ahead or hold on to what they've got, because when our earnings do grow, it's not as fast as the cost of health and retirement and education. So you see, we're going to have these big issues crying out for swift action and bold ideas, needing leadership to bring us forward quickly. And on the other hand, we're going to be a divided nation, and we're going to have to find a way to do it that can actually unify, not polarize, the people of the United States. That is the task of the next president, and that is the president that I am running to be. The president who can help America pick up the pieces, get big things done, and come out of it more together than we were before. That is a tall order, but that's what the powers of the presidency are there for. Only the powers of the presidency, I think, formal and informal, can help us get that job done. And the way I see for us to do it is in the name of our values. Values that make us American and don't belong to any political party. But we got to understand in the right way. When I'm thinking about my own service, for example, I think about all of the different people I served with who came together under a common flag. I think about the value of love of country, of wanting to protect our country. I think about patriotism. And not the cheap nationalism of hugging the flag, or telling some people they don't belong in this country because of the language they speak at home, or what they look like, or how they love, or how they worship. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an inclusive patriotism that begins with the understanding that our country is made of people. And you cannot love a country if you hate half of the people in it. Nor can you protect a country if you're not prepared to do so at home. So that begins with seeing to it, in the name of protecting our country, that we're protecting each other. That's why we got to make sure that the Second Amendment can no longer be confused or twisted into an excuse to do nothing at all on issues of gun violence, when we know that we need universal background checks and red flag laws, and we've got to do something about assault weapons in this country. And if we're serious about keeping our country safe, I don't have to tell Iowa what's on the line when it comes to climate change. We got to keep our future safe, and that means rising to lead the world in dealing with climate change as the global security threat of our time. That's part of protecting our country too. So that's what I mean when I talk about following that value that takes us to a progressive place but can also help us get there together. Thinking about values like faith that ought to belong to all of us. And this country belongs to all of us. According to our Constitution, this country belongs to people of every religion and of no religion equally. That is a core tenet of the United States of America. And I'm also offering to those who are guided by faith principles a chance to have a White House you wouldn't have to scratch your head and look at and say, whatever happened to I was hungry and you fed me? I was a stranger and you welcomed me. People of faith have a choice, and God does not belong to a political party. I'm thinking about values like democracy, but not just democracy as a system. Democracy is a value. The belief that we're only a democracy if every vote is counted and every voter counts. And we're not going to be a democracy so long as districts can be drawn to where politicians pick out their voters rather than the other way around. Or money plays a role that it does in politics. We're not a democracy as long as racial voter suppression is changing the outcomes of our elections. Nor can we lay claim to being a democracy if people are disempowered across this country in so many ways. So let's live up to democracy as a value. And let's live up to that value of freedom that is so important to us as Americans, but has been shrunk in a way in the imagination of some of those today in power in Washington who would tell us that all there is to freedom is cutting every regulation or every tax you've ever seen. I'm not here to protect the freedom of a corporation like Amazon to not have to pay any federal income taxes at all again next year. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about the freedom to live a life of our choosing. That sometimes requires that we get government out of the way, for sure. It means getting government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be, for example. But sometimes it means ensuring that the public sector is ready to step up. We already do this at the local level with a lot of agreement across party lines, that we need to make sure we have quality roads, bridges, and good infrastructure. We support our local schools. But we also ought to support our local schools from Washington with a Secretary of Education who believes in public education and supports our teachers. And how about making sure we honor the principle of American freedom by recognizing that you're not free if you don't have health care? That's why we've got to deliver health care for every American, offering Medicare for all who want it. But the reason I say Medicare for all who want it is I want everybody who chooses to have the opportunity to participate in a Medicare-like program, but I trust you to decide whether you want it. And the important thing to me is you get covered one way or the other. That's how we solve the problem and honor the value in a way that we can actually come together around. Because we have an American majority to do these big things. We got to use it to deal with these issues that can't wait. Can't wait another beat. Can't wait 10 years. Can't wait 4 years. Climate cannot wait. Gun violence cannot wait. We can't wait any longer to deal with the crisis of demographics that has an aging population in this country with not nearly enough saved up for retirement. That's why we need a plan for long-term care, like Long-Term Care America, that I've proposed, and why, unlike the current president, I will keep our promise to secure and protect Social Security for future generations so that it's there when I'm going to be drawing it too. We can't wait to deal with forces like institutional racism that right now has contributed to black home ownership in this country being as low as it's been since the Federal Housing Act was passed. Everybody has a stake in this, and I will be talking about this in majority white audiences too, because this entire country is diminished as long as we allow our economy, our criminal legal system, health, housing, and our democracy itself to be a completely different experience for people of color in the United States. We need to act, and it's why I've proposed the Douglas Plan, as ambitious as the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe, but this time investing right here at home in making sure that this is a country that includes everybody in every opportunity. And even more broadly than that, we got to build a sense of belonging, because so many people in this country are getting a message that says you don't belong. And my message is you do. You belong in the future that we're trying to create under my presidency, and you belong in the campaign that we're building right now. If you have been made to feel like you don't fit because of the language you speak at home, I'm telling you, you belong. If you've been excluded because of who you love, or how you worship, or a disability, or what's happened to you in the economy, or your race, whatever it is, you belong. And I'm building a movement that is here to tell everybody who is drawn to this vision that they belong. Not just progressives who see the world like I do, but moderates and what I like to call future former Republicans, because I see a lot of people ready to cross over and change. We got to build a... Welcome. Good. We're glad you're here. It's not that we're going to agree on everything, it's that we understand the need for a better future in this country. And we cannot wait any longer to make it happen. We have got to act. We've got to act now. And if we get this right, we will be proud of the very things that trouble us so much right now. That we are feeling, I think, the difficulty of standing up tall as Americans right now, seeing the divisiveness and the exclusion and the failures coming out of this White House and coming out of Washington. We can change that. We have an obligation to change that, and that's what this is all about. So I hope that you are prepared to become part of this effort, and I hope that you will caucus for me in February in the name of making sure that we not only put an end to the era that we're living in right now under this president, but we launch the era that must come next. So with that, I don't want this to just be a monologue. I'm eager to have a conversation. And I think we got mic runners. Go ahead and give a wave. Members of our team who will come to you if you have any questions at all. Yes, you're up first.
My name is Heather Carr, and my question is, well, first of all, everything that I've heard you say, I really appreciate, and I think you're pretty awesome. But also, somewhere I read recently, and I don't know if this is true or not, that you had an event that was paid for or sponsored by someone that was really pushing to deregulate charter schools, and I'm a big proponent of public schools, and just kind of wondered how you feel about charter schools and public versus public schools, that kind of thing.
Sure. I'm not sure about that specific report, but I'll tell you exactly where I stand on schools. First of all, I support public education. I do not believe that for-profit charter schools have a future, and I will not support them. I do believe that there have been some charter schools that have created opportunity, but here's my test for whether any charter school can belong in the future that's actually going to be a way that contributes. First of all, is what's going on there going to ultimately benefit traditional public schools, or is it at the expense of traditional public schools? Because everybody deserves a quality education, and it shouldn't come down to whether you won a lottery. So if we're talking about ideas and innovation being piloted, especially in some of the schools that were created by teachers in public school districts, that can then flow into traditional public schools and make everybody better off, I think there's a lot of promise in that. But when we're talking about getting around the kind of regulation, the kind of oversight, the kind of accountability to public authorities, to public school board that we expect of our traditional schools, that is not going to make us better off in the long run. And it's not even a level playing field a lot of the time. In other words, if there's more resources going into a charter school and it's not apples to apples, and then they wind up doing well, that doesn't tell you anything about the things that they're doing there. So I think it's important not to be absolutist about this. I think that we should make sure there's some flexibility, but the end goal is to make sure that all students in traditional public schools have access to excellent public education, beginning with supporting the teaching profession that we know is so critical to making sure we can deliver results.
Hi, Mayor Pete.
Hi.
My name's John Klebrad.
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. I, too, am a recovering Republican. Um, very glad to be here. One of the things I particularly love is your ability and how open you are to talk about religion and to talk about how the other side does not have a monopoly on the religion in that conversation. Why are you so open to talk about your religion, your faith, and why do you think that the Democratic Party, largely so, doesn't speak about religion?
Yeah. My party's been allergic to talking about religion. And I actually think that allergy comes from a healthy beginning. And that beginning is we're very alive to the harms that happen when someone imposes their understanding of their own religion on someone else. Needless to say, I as a member of the LGBT community, know what that can feel like. And we have always and rightly resisted that. But the problem is that's led to a kind of silence on religion that has maybe played into the idea that if you are a person of faith and that guides the way you see the world, you've got nowhere to go but the arms of the religious right. Which is terribly ironic because probably the finest example and the most powerful example from the 20th century that we have of people living their faith, bringing that into the political space, is in the civil rights movement. It's not always called a religious left, but certainly what it is an uprising of those whose faith called them to insist on the dignity and fair treatment and equality of others. And I think that that tradition has a lot to teach us at a moment like this, not only on questions of civil rights, but on questions of economic justice. That idea of the least of these, not to mention the way we treat people at our border. And I just can't think of any God who would smile on people being ripped out of the arms of their parents when they are children. So we tread carefully on this ground because we know the harm that comes from ever imposing one person's religious ideas on another. But this is also a time to call out to people of faith who I know are sitting in the pews, wondering, looking at the person to their right and the person to their left, wondering really if being a believer has to mean that you're on board with the kind of stuff happening in this White House. And I think more and more people are saying, wait a minute, no, there's a choice here. And I want to make sure that that choice is laid out as clearly as possible to people of every moral tradition and of every religious tradition, too. And we're glad you're here. Hi. You got a question? All right. What's that? Oh, how to save the oceans. Okay. What a great question. How old are you, by the way? 3. All right. Have you ever seen the ocean? Maybe a picture of it or seen it on TV? Well, one day, I hope you get to see it. It's really beautiful. You've seen the lake, right? You've seen Storm Lake, how beautiful it is when you look at the water and you see the waves and you see the wind blowing over the water and you see the birds around it. Well, the ocean's like that, but further than you could ever imagine. And so we need to protect it. We need to keep it clean, just like we want to keep our houses clean and our room clean. I hope your room's clean. I'm just teasing a little bit. Sometimes my room gets messy. That's why I was thinking about it. So we have a responsibility to keep the ocean clean. Now, there's a part of the United States called the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a bunch of people whose job is to make sure our air is safe and clean and to make sure our water is safe and clean. And we have to make sure that the people doing that job get what they need in order to make sure they succeed, so that the ocean is in good shape by the time you're old enough to run for president, and many, many years and even hundreds of years into the future. I believe that we can do a much better job of keeping the ocean clean, and I promise to work very hard on making that happen when I'm president. Okay? Thank you. Thanks for your question. Yeah. Nope. Mike will come to you. Go ahead and stand up.
Hello, my name's Anthony. I'm 22, and due to a troubled past, I just want to know how you plan to help the troubled or at-risk youth in rural communities in America.
Well, thanks for being here. And thanks for sharing a little bit about where you're coming from. got to make sure that we are supporting the next generation, your generation, who are up against a lot of ups and downs in life right now. And the most important thing is to make sure that whatever it is that you might have had to overcome, that you're set up for success in the future. That means making sure that there are ways to complete your education if you got more work to do in education. It means making sure that you are able to succeed and get a job. And you mentioned rural America in particular, where a lot of folks feel disconnected from any opportunity to have an economic future that's successful. And yet, we see the potential and the power of what's going on around us. We see innovation in new energy economy and the wind farms that are going in. We see things happening in agriculture that are incredibly exciting. And if you ever compare what a house costs where you live or where I live to where it costs where a lot of the biggest companies in the world are being founded, we can also compete with them on quality of life. So what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that federal policy is designed to support people at every turn in their lives. And also, there are a lot of Americans in different kinds of situations who, because of whatever path they've taken through life, get shut out of opportunity, maybe because they made a mistake in the past. We want to make sure everybody gets a shot at thriving. We need a criminal legal system that reflects the importance of supporting people in the future. We need an education system that can handle non-traditional students who may come into high school completion or college in a different way than others. And if we get that right, we will be doing not just those who are in our programs a favor, we'll be doing ourselves a favor, because everyone has something to contribute to. And my hope for you is that you'll be in a position to bring whatever it is you're best at to bear on your community and to make other lives better, and maybe even to help folks who you can relate to uniquely, who aren't sure where they fit or where they're headed, and help make sure that they have a better shot. Thank you. See, way in the back.
Hi. My name is Beatrice Walker, and I'm sad that I won't be in the participating in the election because I'm 16 now, turned 17 in March. But seeing a presidential candidate who is a fellow member of the LGBT community, it really made me connect and just feel thankful. But my question for you is, how will you address the stigma against the LGBT community in America, and more specifically against the transgender community?
So thanks for raising that. And by the way, just because you won't be old enough to vote in this election doesn't mean you can't have a huge impact as a volunteer, as somebody asking questions of people running for office, and in a lot of other ways. So I'm glad to see that you're already engaged and ahead of the curve. And I'm glad that you're raising this issue, because we need to do a lot in policy, but we also need to do a lot just by example and leadership. So as a matter of policy, what we have to do is pass a federal equality act that will make it against the law to discriminate against anybody because of their sexuality or their gender identity. But there's also a part that goes beyond law, and it's just the message we send. We need a president. It's that bit I was talking about earlier with belonging. We need a president who lets everybody know that they fit in our future. And right now, in education, certainly in the military, where people, and this one makes me so angry because you got a president who avoided serving when it was his turn. You got people willing and ready to serve, and they're good at their jobs, and he's kicking them out of the military because they're transgender, something that has nothing to do with their ability to do a good job for the United States of America. So we got to put an end to the war on transgender people coming from the administration itself and send a message that everybody's contributions are welcome. It's why we need more representation of transgender people in different opportunities to lead. And it's why we need to make sure that we get the word out just in the way we do things, not just the laws, not just the guidance. That's got to change, no question. But in the idea that we value everybody for who they are. And that will be a core principle of my administration. It's also something I think about a lot because LGBTQ is a big category. I don't know what it's like to be transgender, especially when you think about the epidemic against black trans women of violence and what's happening to them. And just as I don't know what it is to be black in America today, or to be excluded because of my immigration status, or to be experiencing sexism. But what I know, what's so powerful, is the way that people have stood up for each other's rights in this country. That the fact that I can wear this wedding ring is not only because of the activism of people like me, but it's because of allies who were not at all like me, who stood shoulder to shoulder with them. And this is a moment, if there's ever been one, for anybody who has been marginalized, anybody who's been on the receiving end of the different patterns of exclusion that our country has, to stand shoulder to shoulder and figure out, each of us, how to make ourselves useful to one another. And that will be guiding and driving my attitude as a candidate and as president. Yes?
My name is Marquise Dominique, and I was wondering, if elected president, how would you address China and their Muslim concentration camps?
Thanks for asking. So important. And look, we got a president right now who seems to think all that matters in the relationship with China is who's selling more dishwashers, right? It's all about trade. And he doesn't even have a good plan on trade. I mean, I'm worried about trade with China too, but all he's done is poke them in the eye. And what happens? They poke back. And it comes down on American farmers, especially if you're in soybeans or pork, but a lot of other areas too. And meanwhile, sounds like some folks here have been on the receiving end of that. But what's even worse is he's been aggressive without a strategy on trade, totally silent on human rights. Whether we're talking about the Hong Kong protesters rising up for their democratic rights, or what you're speaking to, which is the rounding up and detention of Uyghur Muslims based on their identity and their religion into what amount to concentration camps. And the United States, even if we can't march in and change something, we have a lot of tools to bring about a different reality. Our diplomatic, economic, social, information power, just the moral authority that could come from the United States in dealing with these things can make a big difference if it were known that that would be something that would affect our trade deals. Not the president saying, I promise to be quiet about this until we get a deal, but the president saying, hey, we care about this in every step that we take. That matters. But it only works if we're practicing that at home. It's the same thing as climate diplomacy. We're going to have to lead the world in dealing with climate, but it's not going to be very convincing if we're not doing it right here. So when you have an American president who is fanning the flames of Islamophobia right here in the United States, of course, we're not going to be able to have any moral authority or credibility when it comes to dealing with this issue. So what I would do is I would speak up about it and ensure that people who are being oppressed, whether it's because of their religion in Xinjiang or because they want democracy in Hong Kong, know that they have a friend, at least the moral support of the United States of America. And to let the Chinese regime know that if they're going to perpetrate a repeat of the Tiananmen massacre, that they will be isolated from the community of nations. And the United States will lead making sure that there's that kind of accountability. That's how I would approach the issue. Yeah.
Hello, Mayor Pete. My name is Antavion Adams, and I am currently a senior in high school. And while I'm excited to volunteer for you, through conversation, I've realized that many people in my position who are younger and can be a part of a huge voting body will not support anyone and will not take part in politics or anything because they see that either A, their country has failed them, or B, it's not relevant to them. So how can I, going back, show or impress upon people who can really make a big difference that they matter and that they are relevant in this upcoming election?
Such a great question. So I think the first thing you have to say is I hear you, right? To the extent this is driven by rightful frustration about the outcomes of processes, we got to admit that our democracy is not what it ought to be. Again, I keep going back to redistricting. So it is a lie when the president says elections were rigged by ineligible voters showing up at the polls. But it is not a lie to say that many elections are effectively rigged just the way the district is drawn before the voting even begins. And we got to reform our democracy to make sure that it leaves no question in anybody's mind that it's worth getting involved. Now, having acknowledged those problems, it still matters so much to get involved right now. And part of my message to young people is the longer you're planning to be here, the more you have at stake in a whole bunch of decisions about your life that are about to get made. Whether it's around climate, whether it's around the economy, financial decisions. You know, the Democratic Party is not known for talking about the deficit a lot, but I talk about it a lot, partly from a generational perspective, thinking, you know, younger you are, the more likely you are to be here when some of these fiscal time bombs might go off. So we got a responsibility to fix that. Another thing I think is important is to make sure everybody knows how empowered they really are. I have seen decisions change because a few people, sometimes not old enough to vote, have shown up at a community proceeding, maybe a council meeting, and weighed in on a law that was going to be passed. We were just in Denison earlier, where a group of high school students responded to a racial incident in their high school with a walkout that changed the way that their community is thinking about race. I have seen, if you think about it, this is how great changes usually come about in our country or in any country. Again, the civil rights movement is just one example. You could argue the American Revolution itself largely consisted of young people rising up. And so it's, in many ways, the most powerful force we've ever had. But people need to know how empowered they are. The last thing I would leave you with, and it sounds like you're ahead of the curve on this, you already get it, but I just want to put it out there. The most effective thing in making sure that a young person decides to volunteer or even just to vote or caucus is not whether they saw an ad from me. It's whether they heard from somebody they know. It's whether you sent that text or bugged them when they wanted to talk about something else. Whether somebody they already know, and the most powerful thing is to talk about what it means to you. Not before you even get to why you think they ought to think it matters to them. Share what it means to you. Share why you care, why you've taken the trouble to be part of this campaign. That is more powerful than you know. And as you share that story, you'll be amazed how many people will think twice because you asked them to. Thank you. Right ahead of me.
Hi, my name is Jackie. I have a question. Coming from family members that have diabetes and life-threatening allergies, do you have a proposition on pharmaceutical price gouging for life-threatening
Yes. Thank you.
drugs such as EpiPens and insulin?
Yes, and thank you for giving voice to that, because, look, I feel strongly about our Medicare for All Who Want It plan, but the way they talk about health care these days, you think all that mattered was the tug-of-war over how to set up coverage. And meanwhile, we got a whole other set of issues, including the price of pharmaceuticals, that we've got to do something about, especially when you're talking about serious allergies, EpiPens, or insulin for diabetes, things that you need to live. This is not a luxury item. This is something that people need in order to feel physically safe or literally in order to live. And what we're seeing happen on a lot of life-saving medicines and therapies that people's lives depend on is not driven by cost or legitimate market forces. Companies are doing this because they can. It's one thing if there's some shortage on a rare ingredient that goes into some kind of pill. We can all understand that might have an effect on prices. But a lot of what you're talking about and what we're seeing is companies jacking up the prices because they can. That's the only reason. So we got to change that. It's why we've got to, first of all, empower Medicare to actually negotiate drug prices, because that has an effect not just for those on Medicare, but across the entire market. And it's just common sense. Why wouldn't you let them negotiate? But that's not enough. We have to have, I believe, a direct intervention regulating price increases on drugs so that when a drug is brought to market, it cannot be inflated in terms of its price faster than inflation. There would be a tax penalty so big for a company that tries to do that that it wouldn't be worth doing it in the first place. With those kind of teeth in the way that we manage the pharmaceutical marketplace, we will still reward companies that invent wonder therapies and save lives, but we will not permit them to get away with the kind of gouging that you're talking about that is harming so many families across this country. All right. Yellow right in front of me. Yep.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I am a disabled veteran, and I have a PhD in education, and I teach in rural Iowa. So I could give you a whole grocery list of issues to deal with, right? Just because medical needs, educational needs, and rurality. But I really want to focus on veteran care and rurality. So we had choice program. That was a nightmare, right? And so they brought it back into the VA to provide care for us there. But I am continually faced with an inability to get good health care until I am in such severe pain or have issues that I have to be hospitalized. And then I'm faced with bills because VA won't pay them. So what will you do to make VA care, one, consistent and accurate? I can't tell you how many times I've had other people's medical records show up in my files.
Right.
And get the care before the care is so severe that we're having life-risking health problems.
Well, first of all, thank you for serving. And one of the most infuriating things about veterans' medical care is when you come back from serving abroad, you've been willing to fight for this country, and you find that you got to fight a computer or you got to fight bureaucracy once you get home. And we have got to do better. This is not about doing anybody a favor. This is how America keeps a promise. You put up your right hand, you made a promise, you kept your side of it. The promise that the United States makes back to you lasts a lifetime. That's what the VA is there for. So the VA needs to go through a lot of changes. Now, one change the VA, in my opinion, does not need to go through is privatization. That agenda is not going to help any more than Medicaid privatization helped right here in Iowa. And that's about making a lot of money for the president's political friends. But what we do need to do is make sure that the system is more flexible, that it's modernized, that it's adequately funded. Part of what we're up against is the fact that clinical pay is way out of league with what folks can get outside of the VA system. So it's taking longer to hire people in physical and in mental health care. We've got a huge provider shortage. We can cut in half the amount of time it takes to bring somebody on board when they do get hired, as well as adjust the pay so that more people are going into the field, and that helps cut the wait lists. But you talked about the records piece, and this is so important. And I think anybody who's served has had the experience of the forms in triplicate. I mean, it's a master education in bureaucracy. There's so many things I loved about the military, but that bureaucracy is the last thing that should follow you from a military active duty experience to being a veteran. And I believe this won't get better unless it gets coordinated at the highest level. So I'm proposing that we have an official in an office responsible for the DOD and the VA talking to each other. Think about it. You had a medical record when you're active duty. Maybe that wasn't perfect either, but when I was in the Navy, I actually had a pretty good electronic medical record, better than I've ever had on the civilian side. It was updated fairly frequently. How in the world is that not finding its way over to the VA side? Why should I be responsible? You have to figure out how to correct the record that shouldn't even go through your hands. It shouldn't go through any human hands. If we can automate the checkout point at a target, surely we can automate the transfer of information between active duty military and the VA. So the office in charge of coordinating that relationship, I believe, needs to be in the White House, because that's how you get your calls returned, and that's how we make sure that the coordination happens. You do it at the highest level and make sure that it is seamless by the time a veteran, especially a veteran with a service-connected disability, ever has to deal with the system, so that it's not your problem. It's solved long before it ever gets to you. And I'm sorry you got to navigate that in the meantime, but help is on the way.
Mayor Pete, I think that's all the time we have today.
All right.
I'm so sorry, everyone.
One more, real quick.
One more? Okay,
I won't be
one more.
long-winded.
One more.
You get the last word.
Wanda Hoover. First, I'd like to say my daughter just came out. I told her it's about time. Anyway, yes, I will benefit from your health care. My question is, I adopted 3 special needs kids. I adopted 3 meth babies. They are now 12, 13, and 15. My middle son has a lot of disabilities. He has Asperger's. I can no longer, I don't want to cry, I can no longer let him watch TV because he's picking up what Trump is saying. He goes to school and he says it because your autistic kids take things face value. We're getting in trouble for it. What are you going to do when you are on the debate stage with him, when it's down to you two? Will you, I hate to say it this way, will you sink to his level? My kid, I mean, he's getting out of school suspensions because his new thing is now he's going to sue everybody.
Yeah.
Because that's his right.
No, and that's actually
That's
a common.
his right.
Yeah, and I know
And
that's been a
that's the
common
way
stim
he
for a lot of
puts it.
kids with autism, and everybody experiences it in a different way. I've encountered students who have that very same response, and it's not their fault and it's not yours. And there's so many things we could talk about because I got a lot of thoughts on how we support kids and families with disabilities, how we need to have a more, first of all, we need to fund the IDEA so that we actually get the support we need in school. We need to clear up SSDI so it doesn't create the cliffs that have a disincentive to work. And we got to end the sub-minimum wage that values so that we value the contribution of people with disabilities. But I know that's not what you asked about. It's on my mind, so I had to mention it. And by the way, it sounds like each of your kids, including your daughter who's come out, is lucky to have a supportive mom. So good for you. So here's the problem to get to what you actually asked about. Here's the problem with this president. We got to give as good as we get. We got to push back, but we cannot turn into what we're fighting. An equal and opposite Trump is not going to be the answer to this situation we're in. It's like a Chinese finger trap. If you're just pulling in the opposite direction, it just gets tighter. And the challenge will be, of course, he says something that's a lie, you got to say what the truth is. He says something racist, you got to call it out because we can't have that. He does something wrong, it's got to be confronted. But my strategy, and I think the discipline that's going to be required in order to debate him, is to put that in its place real quick and then return to what this election is really about, which is you. It's about our lives. It's about how to make our lives better. Because the less we're talking about whatever crazy tweet he just threw out, the more we can talk about something like how do we make sure a 14-year-old kid in Iowa with Asperger's has a good life ahead of him. These are the things that actually matter to us. This is the question that I believe every election is actually about. The question is, how is my life different if you're president instead of you? And the less we're talking about him, the more we're talking about you. The more we're talking about you, the more I think we will win and deserve to win. So I think that's a pretty good note to end on. I hope that this message moves you, and I hope that you see, as I do, a sense of hope. I know hope went out of style for a little while in politics, but the kind of hope that propels you to take the trouble to pester your friends and try to get them to vote, and the kind of hope that motivates you to spend time in an auditorium with somebody running for office. It's the kind of hope that you need in order to run in the first place. Running for office is an act of hope. They call us candidates hopefuls for a reason. And I am, as tough as things have got, propelled by the confidence that we, if and only if we get these things right, will actually look back with great pride at perhaps not this exact moment in our nation's history, but the moment that's about to come to us. That we could be proud of what we did in 2020 to lead to a better life in this country. And I'm hoping that you will be there to help us bring that about. It's why I'm asking you to caucus for me. It's why I'm encouraging you to reach out to those you know, especially those who've given up on the whole process, and have that shared sense that if we get this right, we will be proud of 2020, and we don't have any time to lose. So I hope that I can earn your support. I'm thankful to have been among you, and I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. Thank you.